when I went to heaven and I came back, um, the immediate time after that was very difficult because I think the initial word I used after I returned was confused. I was very confused. I had been given all this knowledge, but I had not been given understanding. So I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this information. I didn't know what it all meant. And I had been instilled with this tremendous need to be of service.
Mhm.
And it was like a fire had been ignited inside of me. And I didn't know how to put it out. But if I didn't do something, it was going to consume me.
Hello, Michael.
Hello.
It's really great to meet you. And thank you so much for answering my call.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Mm. And welcome to the podcast. And I'm talking today to a very special guest. It's actually my personal curiosity more than anything. um, this is Michael Royer, and he had some very unusual experience. And we're going to get into that, of course. But I don't even know how to introduce Michael to you because it's like two parts of his life, before experience and after. And before there was a lot of achievement, and after there was even more. So maybe, Michael, you could just share a few words about yourself, how you want to be introduced in this podcast.
Thank you, Ilona. Again, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. Um, this experience goes all the way back to 1992, which is now 32 years ago. Prior to that, uh, I had had a career in the Navy as a naval aviator. And thanks to the movie Top Gun, that's, most people know what that is. Um, and I had come out of the Navy, and my wife, Christine, and I had relocated back to our hometown of Southern California. We had both entered the corporate world, and we were living a very comfortable life. We lived in a very nice home in a gated community. She was working for a Fortune 100 company, and I was working for the nation's fifth largest tire and service center as an executive running their franchise administration. And that's what we thought our life was going to be. I think there's a term here they use called the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were living every inch of that.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, over the course of one evening, that all changed.
Mm.
My entire life changed. And in short, I was taken to what we would most commonly call heaven. And I was allowed to exist there for a period of time and taken to three different venues on that heavenly plane where I was taught very specific lessons. And then I was returned back to what I call this earthly plane. And I'll never forget that morning waking up after I was returned to my body and being pulled out of that very abruptly, or being put back in my body very abruptly. After I woke up, I was very connected to the emotions that were heaven. And so I got up out of bed that morning and walked over and found my wife, and I was actually unable to even speak. And I just looked at her, and probably all the blood had drained out of my face. And she just said, "What is wrong? What is wrong?" And I could not even communicate. All I could do was go up and give her this huge hug. And I just sobbed uncontrollably because I was just still overrun with all the emotions that I had experienced in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of where the journey kicked off. And in a very short nutshell, after that evening, um, one of the things I discovered in heaven is that much of what I was doing here back on this earthly plane really was of no consequence. It really was not important. And one of the things that I learned from existing as a spiritual being for that period of time is the importance of being of service to others. And that's one of the predominant things that I brought back from heaven with me. And after that night, um, it was really not a choice. I had to find a way to become of service to others. And so it took a while, and it took a relocation from California to Arizona. But after some years, several years, I was able to find my way into a counseling position and went back to work on my master's degree in counseling and spent the next 21 years and beyond doing just that, being of service to others, and was fortunate enough that I really was put in positions where I was able to help thousands. And that in itself played a very important role in the aftermath of my return. So I think that kind of summarizes a little bit of what has brought us together today.
Right, yes. Because one morning I wake up and I like to go outside in the morning with my cats and drink coffee and read a book. And I ran out of pages. The book was finished. And here was your email saying, hello, maybe you're interested in this book. Like, okay, I'll read it. Yeah, I'm having this coffee. Cats are running around. And the book came in, the first chapter. And when I read the first chapter, I knew I wanted to know more because it was just so intriguing. And the most intriguing thing for me was that it was just so sudden. You didn't take anything. You didn't die. Like people have near-death experiences. Nothing happened to you. You went to sleep and was taken away and out of the body into some spiritual realm. And you brought
Yes.
back so much information. Like you mentioned that it wasn't a dream because you know what the dream is like. And I had many dreams, and that didn't look like a dream.
Right.
So for me,
Right.
that was very interesting because we get information in a way that we can absorb it, we need it, and it doesn't matter what's happening in your outside life, let's say this, in the earthly life, the information that needs to come in comes in. And that's it.
Right. And, with the few people that I did share it with prior to the book becoming available, they would ask me, well, if it wasn't a dream, because we know that's what it was not, it certainly was not, what was it? And I wasn't sure what to call it because I'd never had such an experience before. And, but what I have come to call it was an out of body experience. And the funny thing is, Ilona, that over those 30 some years that it took me to write the book, and we'll maybe talk about why it took me 30 years to write the book, I really denied myself reading or watching podcasts or videos or reading books on near death experiences or things of that nature because I didn't want to accidentally commingle my experience with another's. So it's only recently with the publishing of the book that I've now started watching podcasts and people are talking about their out of body experiences. And it's like, I don't feel so alone now. That it's very clear that that's what it was. And I think because the question I often get is, why? Why do you think this happened to you? And that's another question that I don't have a good answer for. Um, but I think that it was purposeful because many NDEs, near death experiences, can be accidental. And I have come to believe, and I say this with all humility, I don't think my event was accidental. I think that it was planned, and I think there was purpose behind
Mhm.
it. And the purpose, I believe, was the messages that I was given, that I was allowed to bring back with me. And now, through very kind people like yourself, able to share with an audience.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for focusing on you and keeping that pure. Yes, because people talk and that can get distorted, not on purpose, but keeping it to yourself for so long, like being pregnant with knowledge and then just giving birth to that book, which took you 30 years, as you said. Yeah.
That's a very, very good analogy. It was almost like a 30-year pregnancy. And that, but the interesting thing is, and some of your listeners or viewers may want to know, well, why did it take 30 years?
Mhm.
And we talked just a moment ago about when I came back and I had all of this knowledge, literally 1,000 pieces of heavenly information. I had been given the knowledge, but I had not been given the understanding. And when I came back, I knew that I had been given something extremely special. Um, and I knew that I needed to guard it and treat it appropriately, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with it or how I was to begin understanding it. And that's where this, what I refer to as a earthbound journey, started. And so I was sent out on this trek that took me through much of the greater Western United States. And at each one of those places that I was taken to through circumstances, um, I would learn. And it took me the better part of 30 years to gain the knowledge and experience and wisdom necessary to finally connect all of those thousands of pieces of heavenly information that I was given into an understandable final picture. And that's when I finally felt like I had gained the necessary understanding to provide it to the public and say, now I have confidence that I've got this right. I understand it. And now I can deliver the message that I was given to deliver.
Mm. So, talking about the message. Um, well, I invite people to read the book because everything is so well and described there in such a high detail. My cat's going
Well,
crazy.
thank you. I did put a lot of work into it, and some of the early feedback that I've had from people that have read it is just that you make it so understandable. And that's really what I wanted to try to do, because heaven, after being there, I found out it can be as complicated or as simple as we want to make it, um, because it operates from very simple principles. One being, um, spiritual beings operate from a principle of doing what's right.
Mhm.
Because when we leave this body of ours or vessel, whatever we want to call this, um, we also leave behind all the negativity, all the jealousy, the hatred, the greed, the bigotry, all that stays behind. And that's part of what allows us as a being of spirit, once we transition to the heavenly plane, to be so pure. Are those things are left behind, and we are just pure, and we are love, and that's how we exist. Um, and so after I came back, that was also part of my journey, is how can I align myself with existing on this earthly plane as closely as I can to a spiritual being on the heavenly plane. And that's, I think I describe it in the book as it's so different existing on the heavenly plane that sometimes it's like trying to describe color to a colorblind person. You just don't have the proper reference points to do that. So I had to try to use any analogy that I could to try to bring in something that people can say, okay, from my current earthly perspective, I can understand that. And I think I understand what he's trying to describe. And hopefully it makes sense.
Hmm. So from the heavenly perspective, what are
Right,
we?
exactly.
What are we? How would you say, what are we?
Well, one of the things that I talk about early on in the book is I caution the reader that in order to understand this book, you're going to need to set aside your earthly perspective.
Hmm?
Because if you try to use your earthly perspective to try to understand things from a heavenly perspective, it's not going to work. You will not understand it. So, for the purpose of understanding, you're going to have to suspend your earthly perspective, set it aside, and at least try to incorporate this new perspective so that you can understand it. Because again, it is so different.
Aha. So from the earthly perspective, it's beyond description, or it's beyond words.
In many ways, and one of the things, and if you've read the book, you will recall this. um, I make a relatively bold statement in there because one of the things I describe is that I don't care what your perception of heaven is, what you choose to believe. um, the actual truth of heaven is going to differ from
Mhm.
whatever it is you believe. I'm not trying to change anybody's belief. I'm just saying it's going to be different. And I give different examples. And one of the statements that I make early on in the book is that as we currently exist in our earthly form, we are not prepared to transition directly to heaven. We're just not ready. And I said, that statement may offend some, but it's the truth. And what we do is after we die and we leave this physical body, the first place we will all go to is a place that I describe as the hall of transition. And in that hall, some very, very specific things happen. But the purpose behind the hall is that we transition, and there are other spiritual beings there, and their job is to help us transition from the being of flesh and spirit that we were to the being of spirit that we will become.
Mhm.
And once we complete what happens in the hall of transition, then we're ready to go to our next destination. But until we pass through the hall, we're not yet ready because we just don't have, I call them spiritual tools. We just don't have those new tools or spiritual senses on board that we utilize in the heavenly plane or perhaps our other next destination, that are essential for our operation there. And one of the things I would like to put out to your listeners is if anybody has had an experience with a holo transition, I would love to hear about it because that's one thing I have not heard people, I don't think, talk about or describe. And it's a very, very specific place. But I haven't heard people describe it before. So I'd be interested if anyone else
Mhm.
has passed through the hall of transition, yet been able to come back and be able to describe it.
Oh, yeah. Let's hear it. Right. I'm very interested and curious about this shift that you had. It was literally awakening. You woke up in the morning a different being, with a different
Yes,
understanding. It's something
yes,
shifted. So on
yes.
the show, we talk about the shift, like from
Mhm.
seeing the world and yourself in one way shifting and starting to see everything is the same, but everything looks different.
Right.
Fundamental shift.
Uh,
So
yes.
the shift happens, but then there's a period of integration, a period
Yes.
of bringing that knowledge, the new knowledge, knowing, into everyday experience. And I'm curious, what was the most difficult for you after that shift?
Um, yes. There was some great difficulty because and coming onto your show, you kind of alerted me that I'm going to ask you about what you think about your awakening process. And I had a little time to think about it. And it was interesting, Ilona. Before I was going to appear on your show, I had never really thought about it in those terms as far as an awakening or an enlightenment or, whatever
Mm-hmm.
term they choose to use. And so I gave it a little bit of thought. And it was very interesting as I thought about it. It really helped bring me back to what I had written and my process and almost look at it in a little different way. And I might wrap up with that. But to start with, um, I think my awakening was a process. And actually, I believe my process started 4 years before I actually took this journey to heaven, going back to 1988. And as we mentioned, I was in the Navy, I was a naval aviator, and I was going on one of my last flights with the Navy. I was in an airplane, I was flying by myself. And without going into too much detail, I got myself into a very bad situation in the airplane. Um, and it was a very extreme situation. And it was through stupidity. Uh, and it got so bad so quickly that I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was going to die.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, um, up until that time, I had not been one to pray very much, but I thought I have nothing to lose. And I said a very quick prayer. I just simply said, God, don't let me die. And Alana, the moment I said that prayer, not 2 seconds after, not the moment I said that prayer, my situation changed. And I knew I was going to be okay. And I flew out of the situation. And when it was done, I was just beside myself and I collected myself. And when I thought back on it after I'd landed and was okay, I said, I think I have a decision to make here. I can I can agree to think that that was nothing more than coincidence. It was just luck.
Hmm.
Or I can accept that in my greatest moment of need, I reached out to God and He answered my prayer and He saved my life. And that was the decision that I chose to make. And since that moment, my life has been different. And I think that may have set the foundation for later going to heaven, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, when I went to heaven and I came back, um, the immediate time after that was very difficult because I think the initial word I used after I returned was confused. I was very confused. And I know people might say, well, Mike, wait a minute. You went to heaven. You describe it as being perfect. So how come when you came back, you were confused? And I alluded to it earlier by saying that I had been given all this knowledge, but I had not been given understanding. So I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this information. I didn't know what it all meant. And I had been instilled with this tremendous need to be of service.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a fire had been ignited inside of me, and I didn't know how to put it out. But if I didn't do something, it was going to consume me. So after grappling with this for several weeks, I told my wife, I said, I don't know how to tell you this, but we have to sell our job or quit, sell our house, quit our jobs, and move. And she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, I I have got to solve this. I've got to figure this out. And I'm not supposed to do it here in California. So those were the only two things I was left with, Ilona, was I I had to leave our current environment and I had to go to Arizona. What was there waiting? I did not know. And it took some years, but that's where I eventually got into the helping professions. And it was through that process and that journey that it allowed me to finally start gaining understanding. So I was able to take this knowledge and start now properly interpreting it, putting the puzzle together, and gaining understanding. And then that process just grew and accelerated. And then 8 years later, after I thought that I had enough understanding, well, maybe I'll start putting it on paper. Maybe I'll even start writing a book. Then that all gets upended. And I'm once again, 8 years later, taken on a second journey, just like the first. And if I was confused before my first, when I came back, I was doubly confused because nothing from the second journey fit within the context of my first journey. So
Mm-hmm.
now I was in real trouble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it sounds like, there was a download of information, but it had to
Yes.
be installed in the right places.
Yes.
Like that piece had to be there, that piece had to be there, and that had to be there. And until
Yes.
everything is in the right place, it's just like a bundle of information.
It was almost a lot of like given a book in a foreign language that you only understand a few of the words, but you know that contained within that book is such tremendous knowledge, and you know you have to figure it out, but there's nobody around that can understand that language or interpret it for you. So you just have to put in the work to learn the language. And that became my journey of awakening, was getting out on this earthbound journey, putting in the work, being of service to others. And that allowed me to finally learn the new language and now gain the understanding of the knowledge that I had been given.
Mm. And here we are.
And so here we are.
And here we are. So let's talk about the message. The
Yes.
main message.
Right.
What do you really want people to know? From where you
Yeah.
are now, what is the message?
Right. And that was even a little bit of a surprise to me because um, initially, when I first started thinking about writing a book, and that was 8 years after my return, I still didn't have full understanding, but I thought I had enough understanding to at least start writing about my experience. Then the second journey came along and took me to a completely different location. And so it took me a number of years to finally interpret that. And interestingly enough, Ilona, my journey took me to working with people contemplating suicide.
Mm.
And I worked in that population for about 8 years. I probably did somewhere around 3,500 face to face encounters with people contemplating or who had attempted suicide. And even though that was very intense work, that taught me so much about interpreting my second journey. And so I thought, okay, this book will now be about my first journey to heaven. And then we're giving a little bit away, but my second journey was actually to the gates of hell, not into hell itself, thankfully, but to the gates of hell, where I interacted with a soul that was recently had come out of that location. So I thought, okay, now I've got more to write about. And I have this context now of bookends. I have heaven and I have the gates of hell. So I can talk about those two things. And once I finally was able to assemble all the puzzle pieces, I found out that although as important and as incredible as that information was, that was not to take front stage. What the message was intended to be is that information stands as a backdrop. The message is that those lessons learned at those two places are designed to be understood and learned by us in the here and now, because the path many of us are currently on is not in alignment with the path that we are supposed to be on, our natural path that we're supposed to develop. And I think that path comes as a result of being awakened. I think part of the awakening, I don't know if it's chicken or egg, get on the path that helps us become awakened, or we become awakened and we get on the right path, the journey we're supposed to be on. But so a whole third section of the book, now I found out after looking at the final picture, needed to be written. And it was to help us here in our earthly state understand that we are currently supposed to be living under those universal laws or lessons that spiritual beings abide by. Because, very simply put, as we currently exist, we are both flesh and spirit. That spirit is obviously currently within it. So it is still learning, it is still growing, and we need to live in the here and now as closely in alignment as we can with the spiritual beings that are on the heavenly plane. So that's, I think, more than anything, what this book is. It's an opportunity to learn how spiritual beings exist, what guidance they follow, and then offer the reader an opportunity to say, this is the guidance we are supposed to be following now, and offer them again a greater understanding of that so that they can perhaps incorporate that into their life and hopefully bring them into a place of peace and harmony and balance, which is where we're supposed to be.
What I got from your book as a confirmation, it was this word service, or like being of service. Right. And I recognize that for many years I've been doing just that, just offering my service, and just continue to keep doing this the best that I can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, the one interesting thing, as I knew we were going to discuss the topic awakening, and going through the process of having your heart opened and having your mind opened and having your eyes opened, it's not just about arriving at a place of awakening or enlightenment. It's about putting that awakening into action. I almost look at it as a call to duty. Your call to duty was creating this informative podcast to offer people information and perspective on how people reach their point of awakening. And maybe some of those will resonate with people. Maybe it won't, because I believe everybody's path is a bit different. Sure. But it's, I believe, a call to action. And you have taken your action. My action was in the form of becoming a counselor and working with people, working with young people at risk, helping them try to leave behind some of their emotional encumberments and live a better life, working with people contemplating with suicide, trying to help instill hope so that they could find a way to move on with their life and live a life filled with hope and joy. And so that's kind of what I believe my call to duty was. And I think that it all culminated in the writing of this book, because although, as I mentioned, I've had the good fortune and have truly been blessed to be able to help thousands through the years. I'm hoping this book will provide me with the opportunity to help a great many more just by sharing the experience and perhaps having an experience that they themselves have had connect with something in the book and validate for them that that connects with me. I can understand that, and hopefully lead them on to something productive and something positive.
Wonderful. And when you talked about people that contemplate suicide, they are giving up on life. There's no light at all. The only thing is to die, to escape the suffering, to end the suffering. And here they meet you, and you actually know what it's like to be at the gates of hell. So you say, all right, then you're gonna go
Yeah,
past me. You just really want to go there, or you want
well, I'll tell you,
to.
I was very fortunate because here was an interesting element of returning from heaven. Um, I mentioned that when we're in heaven and after we come through the hall of transition, we're given special tools, spiritual tools that we use on the heavenly plane. We use them to communicate. They allow us to emotionally connect with other spiritual beings and to learn and process information much differently than we do in the here and now. So when I came back, one of the things I knew that had been instilled in me was, as I mentioned, the need to be of service to others. But what I didn't understand at the time is that I had been left with another spiritual tool that spiritual beings have, which was a very high level of insight or intuition. And I did not know that initially. And my first inclination that I had been given or been allowed to retain that was shortly after I returned. For example, we would go to a party, a work party with my wife, and a lot of her coworkers were there. And I had not met any of them, but standing aside with her, I could look at one and go, is that lady over there? Yeah. Does she display this type of personality? Does she do this? Are her tendencies to do this? And she goes, yes, that's exactly what she does and how she does it. How do you know that? And it was just as if I could look at a person and I could understand their nature and their tendencies. Um, and it was years later, working with people contemplating suicide, that I gained the confidence to use this tool in working with them. Because as a crisis counselor, you come and meet that person, and they're going to talk with you maybe about the most vulnerable moment in their life where they're contemplating taking their life. And you have to walk in and say, hi, my name is Mike. I'm here to help you. Tell me what you're experiencing right now. Quite often, they don't want to talk to you. They don't know you. They don't trust you. They don't know what your motives are. So I learned to trust this intuition I had. And this is what I would do. I would look at them and say, okay, I understand that you don't want to talk with me, and that's okay. But let me talk to you for a moment. And here's what we'll do. I'm going to tell you three things about yourself. And all I'm asking is that you tell me if I'm wrong. And I would go, okay, I think that you are struggling with this item right here. I think that this is what brought you to the point of feeling suicidal. And I also believe that you're struggling with this because of that. And they would look at me and go, how do you know that? Who have you been talking to? And I would say, no one. Well, how do you know that? Well, because I was acting in the role of a professional counselor, I couldn't really share with them how that I knew that. But without fail, it broke the ice. And then they would start talking with me. And I would say that I'm only here to help you. And again, without exception, that would break the ice. And I was able to give those people help and assistance. And it was a wonderful gift to have. And I always tried to use it only when I needed to and only with sincerity. But I will share with you, Ilona, that over those 3,500 interactions I had over those 8 years, I only lost one client to suicide. And I still carry that person with me.
Mhm.
But I do feel that I was able um, to provide help to those in need. And I got my confirmation by so many times. A quick story. I lived in a small community, and on pretty frequent occasion, I would run into these people,
Mhm.
and they would walk up to me as I was shopping and say, "Do you remember me?" And I tend to remember through context. And I would say, "Well, help me remember. Well, you encountered me when I was struggling with this, and you helped me, and I had, a father that was alcoholic, whatever it was." And I would say, "Oh, yes." And then I would lend to the conversation, showing them that I remembered. And then they would say to me, "I always promised myself if I ever saw you again, I would go out of my way to say thank you because you saved my life that day." And talk about a humbling experience. And that happened more than once. And even today, reflecting back on that, it gives me goosebumps. But that was the type of service that I was allowed to do. That was my call to action. That was part of it. But it also helped me unravel a lot of the mysteries of what I was given on my first and second journey.
I love what you said that the heart opens, the mind opens, the eyes open. I never heard that
Yes.
before. I think it's beautiful. The eyes open. So you got kind of X-ray vision. Is it something on all the time or is it on by will?
Well, back then, it was something that through use, it's almost like a bodybuilder who lifts weights all the time, and they get big and strong and they develop those muscles. Well, I just was developing different skills
Mhm.
and I used them quite often. But through time and distance, like the person who stops lifting weights, the muscles get a little bit smaller. So it's not as prevalent as it used to be. I still have can still have very strong um, impressions of people, good or bad, and that can sometimes be difficult because if I have a intuition about a person that their energy is very bad, it's difficult to be around them,
Mhm.
and I have to politely try to distance myself. On the other hand, it's nice to see people that put out a very positive, good energy. And I find myself, those are the people that I gravitate toward. And what I've come to refer to them as, Ilona, in these later years, I call them real people because they don't put on a facade, they don't wear a mask, they don't try to convince somebody of what they're not. They're just genuine. They're comfortable with themselves, who they are, and they're comfortable having people know them as who they are. And those are the people I love to be around these days. And those are the people I think truthfully that I try to seek out. I try to be myself, that type of person. Um, and I love being around people. Sometimes, honestly, they can be hard to find because I think so many of us struggle with trying to find out who we are. Um, but discovering those people that have made that discovery, um, they are nice to be around.
Are you crying? Sweet. Mm. I ask everyone, what is your advice for somebody who's seeking awakening, seeking enlightenment, seeking for something? Truth to be told, everyone is seeking for peace, for being
Yes,
comfortable in their own skin, in their own environment, in their own life, peace
yes,
with what is. And that seeking can be taking years, not just months, years and years.
it
And
can.
what would be your advice for these people?
Well, if you'll indulge me, I'll draw on my book a little bit because truthfully, that is an area that I spent a lot of time thinking about because when it comes down to it, you asked earlier, what is the message of the book? And the message, again, I think, is to allow people an opportunity to incorporate the lessons that spiritual beings live by. But I think that we have a lot of challenges today in doing that. And I outline those in the book. And some of the things that I talk about is I talk about something I call the triangle of greed. And I talk about and I make an apology in the book because I know this may offend some people. And my intent is not to offend, but to try to help people be a bit more observant. And being under the influence of greed can happen to so many of us. And it's not just about money, but it can be about power. It can be about seeking favor or acceptance, and we can fall prey to greed. Greed is a very, very powerful adversary, and we have to find ways to circumnavigate greed and get away from it. And the other thing I put on the triangle that is such a powerful foe is fear. One of the things that I talk about is fear being the great paralyzer. Fear keeps us stuck. It keeps us from taking chances or taking risks. And sometimes to set out on these journeys of awakening, we have to take risks. We have to leave behind what feels safe and secure and take a risk, or sometimes we call it a leap of faith. And fear is such a powerful tool, and it has such negative subsidiaries like anger, insecurities, jealousy. And so we have to find ways to identify fear and how to combat it. And then I talk about lust. And when we hear the term lust, we might think of, sex. But that's not how I describe it. Social media is such a powerful tool these days, and it can be used for good or bad. And we see so many young people under the influence of these social influencers, and they are so swayed to try to become like someone else. And we lust after being somebody else or their fame or their money. And I try to caution them and say, you can't do that, because if you do that, you're ignoring the wonderful person that you are intended to be. There's only one you. That other person you're trying to emulate already exists because somebody else is depending on you. And it's up to you to help them discover who they need to be. And if you never become your true self, you never have that opportunity to help someone else on their journey. So that's what I think gets in their way. And I call that living on the triangle. And I ask people to take a self inventory and truthfully examine what components of the triangle are influencing their life right now,
Mhm.
and how they can set a course to move off of the triangle and onto the circle. And the circle that I created emulates spiritual beings and how they exist on the heavenly plane. And at the top of the circle is love. Because if I was forced to describe God in one word, it would be love, complete and unconditional and unending love. And if we can guide our lives by love, we're going to be in a much better place. If we're able to lead with love, then that allows us to be kind because kindness springs from love. And if we can be kind to both ourselves and others, then that puts not only us in a better place, but it puts those people that we encounter in a better place. Because instead of being on the triangle and acting out of anger, we act out of kindness towards others and encourage them to be kind to others. And if we can be kind, then it brings us to a place where we can forgive. Because working as a counselor, I learned that so many people struggle that have been done to them, and they cannot or have not found their way to a place of forgiveness where they can forgive themselves or forgive others. And in order to move through that circle, you have to be able to forgive. And if you can forgive yourself for acts that you've done towards others, and you can forgive others that have done terrible things to you, then you can start bringing yourself into balance and harmony, because you can't live a life of peace if you are out of balance. And if you can accomplish those three things, then you can move to the last place on the circle, which is a place of peace. And I think you said earlier, we're all striving to find a place of peace. And I believe you have to move through those three things. And the reason I say that with conviction, those are the things that spiritual beings on the heavenly plane incorporate. That's how they operate. That's how they treat each other. That's their operating manual.
Mm.
And all I do is offer people in the here and now an opportunity to evaluate that and decide if their life is better lived on the triangle or is it better lived on the circle. But as you said earlier, that transition can take time and patience, and it doesn't necessarily happen easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for bringing these two, triangle and the circle, into the conversation, because this is one thing I really loved in your book.
Thank
The
you.
book was great, but this particular thing stood out. There is so much truth in there, and it resonates.
Well, speaking of resonating, and I wanted to ask you, and I know you've been asking the questions, and I hope you don't find it improper if I ask you a question. But although the book has just been published, it has been such a reward to me that people that have already read it have come back and have shared with me their validation, saying to me, this is what resonated with me after I read your book. And this is what validated your book for me. And I go into some description in my book that I was worried about that. But I was told that validating the book was beyond me. That wasn't my job. My job in all of this was to tell the truth without an ounce of embellishment or an inch of deviation. Tell the whole and complete truth. And what I wanted to ask you after reading the book, was there something in that book that resonated with you personally, if I may ask, and gave you validation?
Well, it was really clear that everyone is having their experience exactly the way they need to have it. And it comes. Don't need to look for it. It comes. It's given. That's one thing. Like, we all are on our own journey, and we don't need to look up for what other people are doing or what experiences other people are having. It's just the only thing is to focus here. on ourselves, on our perception of life, on our experience in being ourselves. And then what happened in that other realm or that other dimension, I don't even know how to call it. Right? What happened there is something to look forward to. And
Yes.
I'm lucky because I had the experience of seeing what is beyond death. And for me, death is no longer something to be afraid of. But it was like, yay, there's so much more. There's so much curiosity there and anticipation. I'm not saying I want to leave this place tomorrow or today to go there, but yeah, why not? There is no fear of that. So that was
Yes.
beautiful. And the strongest thing is that service thing. If we are meant to come here and be of service to the whole, why not to do it now?
Well said. Well said.
Because
I
if
believe
not
that
now, when? We don't need to wait.
yes, that's right.
Can be of service now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me because this has been a 30-year, not always a labor of love, sometimes a labor of quite a bit of struggle um, getting to this point. But I always knew that I was being guided. Um, I never lost that faith. And one other thing, if I could, Ilona, and I think this is very important when we're talking about awakening. And again, I don't mean this to sound as a criticism, but I think people can be a little fickle. They can say that they incorporate a belief, and then a month or two later, it's like going to the gym after New Year's resolution. I go for 3 months and then I stop. Uh, when you have a true awakening, I really feel that it connects with your very soul. And if you do experience a true awakening, I don't think you can ever recant on it or give it back. It's there, it's yours to keep. And so, although there were times during the course of my 30-year journey that I felt frustration and felt struggles and confusion, I knew that I could never give up because I felt that what I had been given was true, and that I had no choice but to see it through. Um, it's yours for the keeping, I guess I would say.
Wow, that hour went so quick.
Well, you've been a wonderful host.
Thank you. And I would like you to share if you have any final words or something that we didn't touch and you wanted to say, whatever is coming up.
Well, again, I would just encourage people to focus on living a life, again, guided by love. Love is the most powerful tool that we have on this earthly plane. And I think sometimes we underestimate the power of love. I believe we really do. And this world can be hard. It can be sometimes uncaring, and it can be difficult for us to understand that we are loved and we can love others. But love is always there. And like a compass, love should be that North Star that guides us. And as I mentioned earlier, through love comes kindness. Through kindness becomes the ability to forgive. And I just wish that people could incorporate that into their life, because I truly believe it will make all the difference. And on that day when we do cross over, they will already have started living their life in accordance with how spiritual beings do. And like you said, why wait? why wait? But I would love, Ilona, if any of your listeners uh, would like to contact me with their own stories
Mhm.
or their own experiences, or if they read the book and want to share their own validations, I would love to hear from them. And if I just might say, my website is heavenlylessons.org, heavenlylessons.org. And I always love to hear from people.
Mm, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I don't think we mentioned the name of your book.
It's Lessons from Heaven and Beyond.
Mhm.
It's currently available on Amazon in both as an ebook for your Kindle or phone, and just as of today, but it will be out by the time this airs, I believe, the paperback version is now available also. So that's Lessons from Heaven and Beyond. And again, my website is heavenlylessons.org.
Yes. Thank you so much, Michael. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
It has been my true pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for watching and listening. And I hope you got something here, something of curiosity and interest, and maybe a lesson or two. And I encourage people read the book. It's pretty awesome. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.